It was one of those mornings that felt like any other. The sun had just climbed over the small-town skyline, and the streets were still half asleep. A few people walked their dogs, coffee cups in hand, while the sound of distant traffic mixed with birdsong. It was calm, quiet, and safe. At least it looked that way from the outside. Down a narrow road lined with old trees, a young girl was driving home from her friend's house. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't breaking any rules. She was just listening to the radio, window slightly down, enjoying the wind in her hair. It was a simple drive that should have lasted no more than 10 minutes. But sometimes life changes in moments you never see coming. In her rearview mirror, flashing blue and red lights appeared suddenly. Her heart skipped. She looked at the speedometer. She was fine. Still, she pulled over to the side, as anyone would. The police car stopped behind her, engine humming. She could see the reflection of the officer stepping out. At first, she felt nervous but not scared. She had always believed that police officers were there to help, to protect, to serve. Her father had told her that if she ever got stopped, she should stay calm, keep her hands visible, and speak politely. So she did exactly that. The officer walked slowly toward her window. His boots hit the gravel with firm steps. He was tall, older, with a hard face that didn't show much warmth. He didn't greet her kindly or explain much. He just leaned in slightly and said he needed to check something. She nodded, unsure why he seemed so tense. Maybe he thought she looked too young to drive. Maybe there was a mistake with her license plate. She tried to keep breathing evenly, but his eyes lingered longer than they should have. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. Not like an officer doing his job, but like someone who enjoyed the power that came with the badge. He asked her to step out of the car. Her hands trembled slightly as she did. The wind had picked up now, and the leaves rustled around them. The street was empty. No other cars were in sight. The air felt heavy with silence. The questions he asked didn't make sense. He wanted to know where she was going, where she lived, and if her parents were home. His voice was calm, but his tone carried something sharp underneath, like a quiet threat hidden behind politeness. At one point, his behavior crossed a line that left the girl frozen and confused, too scared to argue or shout. She wanted to believe it wasn't happening, that maybe she misunderstood his intentions, but deep down she knew what she felt. She felt humiliated, small, powerless. After a few tense minutes that felt like hours, the officer walked back to his car without another word. He left as suddenly as he came, leaving the girl standing there, trembling beside the open door of her car. She didn't cry right away. She just stood there staring at the road, trying to make sense of what had just happened. When she finally got home, her mother noticed something was wrong immediately. The girl's hands were shaking, her voice cracked when she tried to explain. Her mother listened, her face turning pale. Then came the anger, the kind that mixes with disbelief. They went to the local police department that same day. The officer on duty listened but didn't seem very interested. He took some notes, asked a few routine questions, and said they'd look into it. The family waited. Days turned into weeks, but no one called them back. The only thing they received was a short message saying there was no evidence of misconduct. That answer didn't sit right. The girl knew what happened. Her mother knew. But when they talked to neighbors or friends about it, people grew quiet. Some looked uncomfortable. Others whispered that it was better to leave things alone. The officer in question had been in that town for years. People said he was strict but fair. Others said he had a temper, but no one ever wanted to be the one to challenge him. At night, the girl couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flashing lights, the road, and that face. She started avoiding driving altogether. Her friends didn't understand why she stopped coming to hangouts. She didn't tell them the whole story, only that she didn't feel safe anymore. Her father tried to stay calm for her sake, but the frustration in his eyes was hard to hide. He had always believed in doing the right thing, in trusting the system. But now even he was starting to doubt it. Every time he drove past a patrol car, his jaw tightened. The town itself went on as if nothing had happened. People still gathered at diners for morning coffee. The local news still played cheerful weather updates, and life continued with its quiet rhythm. But for one family, everything had changed. The girl started noticing things she never paid attention to before. The way some officers treated people differently depending on their skin color. The way certain people in town avoided eye contact when uncomfortable topics came up. It was like a curtain had been pulled back. revealing something ugly underneath the surface of everyday life. One afternoon, her mother decided to visit the police station again, this time demanding to see a supervisor. She was calm but firm. She wanted answers. The man behind the desk gave polite but distant replies, repeating that the investigation was closed. When she asked about body camera footage, he said there was none available from that day. That was the moment she realized the system wasn't built to protect them. It was built to protect itself. The girl overheard that conversation from the hallway. It made her feel small again, like the world was divided into two kinds of people, those who had power and those who didn't. She wanted to shout, to make them see what had happened, but her words felt useless. When they got home, her mother hugged her tightly and said, "We'll find another way." But neither of them knew what that meant yet. Days passed. The girl spent more time alone in her room, writing in her journal. She wrote down everything she remembered from that morning, the exact words, the sounds, the feeling in her chest. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was her way of holding on to the truth in a world that didn't seem to care. Sometimes she thought about what would have happened if she had said no, if she had fought back, if she had filmed it on her phone. But those thoughts only made her more anxious. She knew how the story would have been twisted, how people would say she was being dramatic or disrespectful. She had seen how quick people were to defend authority, even when it was wrong. The days turned colder, and with each passing week it seemed like the world wanted her to forget. But forgetting wasn't easy. Every time she passed that road, a chill ran through her. It wasn't just fear. It was a sense of injustice that burned quietly inside her. Then one afternoon, something small but important happened. While walking home from the grocery store, she heard two older women talking by the corner store. One of them mentioned the same officer, saying her nephew had been stopped unfairly a few months earlier. Nothing serious happened, but the way she said it, like it was common knowledge, made the girl stop in her tracks. That was the first time she realized she wasn't alone. Later that night, she told her parents what she'd overheard. Her mother's eyes lit with a spark of recognition. Maybe this wasn't just about one moment, one mistake. Maybe it was part of something bigger, something that had been going on quietly for a long time. The next morning, her mother started making calls to local journalists, to community members, to anyone who might listen. Most didn't respond. Some said they couldn't help without proof. But one person did answer. A calm voice on the other end said, "I've heard stories about that officer before. Let's talk." It was the first sign of hope they had felt in months. For the girl, it meant something even deeper. She realized that the truth doesn't disappear just because people ignore it. It waits for the right voice, the right moment, the right person to bring it into the light. That night, she sat by her window staring at the quiet street below. The world outside looked peaceful again, but she knew better now. She knew peace wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of justice. And somewhere out there, someone was going to help her find it. For weeks, the girl's story stayed quiet, like a secret people were afraid to say out loud. Her family had told the truth to everyone who would listen, but the words never seemed to go far. It was as if the town had built invisible walls around certain truths, walls made of fear, habit, and silence. But silence has a way of cracking. It starts small, with whispers, then turns into something louder. One morning, the girl's mother went to the local market. As she stood by the counter, she noticed a woman across the aisle watching her. The woman was older, with kind eyes but a serious expression. She walked over slowly and said quietly, "I heard what happened to your daughter." At first, the mother didn't know how to respond. Most people avoided talking about it, afraid of getting involved. But this woman wasn't afraid. She introduced herself simply and said she worked at a local community center that helped families who faced unfair treatment. She didn't speak like an activist or someone trying to make a scene. She spoke like a person who had seen too much pain to ignore another story. She listened carefully as the mother explained everything. How the complaint was dismissed, how people told them to let it go, how the girl was still scared to drive. When she finished, the woman nodded slowly and said, "I believe you, and I'm going to help you." It was the first time anyone outside the family had said those words. Later that week, the woman visited their home. She brought coffee and a notebook filled with names and numbers. contacts, journalists, lawyers, and people who had faced similar experiences. She had been doing this kind of work for years, helping people who felt powerless stand a little taller. When she met the girl, she spoke softly, with warmth in her voice. She didn't ask her to relive every painful detail. Instead, she said, "You've already been brave once. You told the truth. Now let's make sure that truth is heard." Those words stuck with the girl. For the first time since that morning, she felt something different, something that almost felt like courage. As days passed, the woman began quietly gathering stories from around town. She spoke to people who had crossed paths with the same officer. Most didn't want their names mentioned, but they confirmed what she already suspected. Some said they had been stopped for no reason. Others said he spoke harshly to them or treated them unfairly. Each story added a small piece to a larger picture, a picture the town had chosen not to see. The woman also reached out to a local reporter she trusted. The reporter had covered social issues before and wasn't afraid to dig into uncomfortable truths. Together they started to collect facts, records, testimonies, and even old complaints that had been quietly filed away. At first, there wasn't much progress. The police department refused to share body cam footage, saying it was unavailable. The reporter's emails went unanswered. But little by little, the story began to spread through whispers again. At the local diner, people started to talk. Some defended the officer, saying he had always been strict but fair. Others began to question what they once ignored. "Maybe it's true," someone said over coffee one morning. "I remember when he stopped my nephew for no reason last year." Rumors travel fast in small towns, and soon everyone had an opinion. But amid all the noise, a quiet movement began forming. The woman from the community center gathered volunteers, teachers, parents, students, anyone who believed that wrong should be made right. One evening, they met in a small church hall. The lights were dim and the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The woman stood at the front holding a folder filled with documents and handwritten notes. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about respect. It's about making sure this never happens again to anyone." The group nodded, some nervously, some with determination. They decided to hold a community meeting the following week, open to anyone who wanted to share their experience. When the girl heard about it, she wasn't sure she wanted to go. The thought of facing a room full of people, some of whom might not believe her, made her stomach twist. But her mother told her she didn't have to speak. "Just come," she said. "Listen. You'll see that you're not alone." That night of the meeting, the room filled slowly. There were old faces and new ones, people from all walks of life. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, students. Some came out of curiosity, others out of quiet anger. The woman began by introducing herself and explaining why they were there. Then she asked if anyone wanted to share. For a while, no one spoke. The silence felt heavy, but then an older man in the back raised his hand. He said he'd lived in the town for 40 years. He had seen how things worked, how certain people were treated differently, how complaints disappeared. "I've seen good officers," he said, "but I've also seen ones who think the badge makes them untouchable." Another person spoke up, then another. Stories started to pour out, not all about the same officer, but all sharing the same feeling of helplessness. People talked about being ignored, dismissed, or silenced. The girl sat quietly listening. Each story made her realize that what happened to her wasn't isolated. It was part of something deeper, something that had been happening for years in small, quiet ways. After the meeting, the woman thanked everyone and reminded them that change begins when people stop being afraid to tell the truth. The room filled with quiet clapping, not loud or proud, but sincere. As people left, the girl stayed behind, helping to gather chairs. The woman approached her with a gentle smile and said, "I saw you listening. That's the first step toward healing. Listening, then choosing what to do next." The girl nodded. For the first time in a long while, she felt lighter. The following days brought attention from outside the town. The reporter's story was published online, describing the family's experience and the growing community response. It didn't name the girl directly, but people knew. Some offered support, others criticized. Social media lit up with comments, some kind, others cruel. But the truth was out there now. The silence had been broken. The officer, meanwhile, carried on with his duties as if nothing had happened. But even he could feel the change in the air. People looked at him differently now. The whispers followed him wherever he went. The police department released a short statement. calling the article one-sided and misleading. They insisted that their officer had followed proper procedure. But behind closed doors there were quiet discussions. Officials worried about reputation, about public trust, about what might come next. The woman didn't stop. She kept organizing meetings, helping more people share their experiences. She spoke at local schools, encouraging young people to know their rights and to believe in their voice. One afternoon, she invited the girl and her mother to visit the community center. The place was small but full of energy. Posters about fairness, shelves stacked with books, and a wall filled with photographs of past campaigns for equality. "This is what standing up looks like," the woman said. "It's not loud or violent. It's steady. It's people helping each other believe again." The girl looked around the room and felt something shift inside her. For months she had been scared and quiet, but now she felt a spark of strength she didn't know she had. The woman saw it too. "You don't have to be fearless to make change," she said softly. "You just have to care enough not to walk away." That night the girl wrote in her journal again, but this time her words were different. She didn't just describe what had happened, she wrote about what was happening now. About people standing together, about how truth was finding its voice. She ended her entry with one line: "Maybe justice begins when someone finally listens." As autumn began to fade, the town wasn't the same anymore. People had started to question things they once accepted. The small community that had always avoided conflict was now facing uncomfortable conversations at dinner tables, workplaces, and church halls. And through it all, the girl found quiet strength in knowing that change had already started, because one woman refused to look on. The weeks that followed were filled with both hope and tension. The story had reached far beyond the little town now. People were starting to pay attention. Some were proud that someone had finally spoken up. Others wished everything would just go back to normal. But things were not going back. The woman from the community center worked harder than ever. She spent her days talking to families, her evenings making phone calls, and her nights studying old reports. The more she looked, the clearer the pattern became. The officer in question had a long record of complaints that had been quietly dismissed or lost in paperwork. Some were small things, rude language, unfair stops. But together they painted a picture of someone who had been using power in all the wrong ways for far too long. One afternoon, the woman met with a small group of local lawyers who supported civil rights cases. They gathered in the back room of a small library where the smell of old books mixed with the hum of determination. The lawyers listened carefully as she explained everything. They looked through her notes, the reports, and the testimonies she had collected. When she finished, one of them leaned back and said quietly, "There's enough here to start something real." The words hit her like a spark. She had been waiting to hear that for months. Meanwhile, the girl's family was slowly learning what it meant to live under a spotlight. Strangers sometimes stopped them in grocery stores to whisper words of support. Others looked away, pretending not to see them. The girl's father noticed how some people's smiles had turned cold. But none of that mattered as much as what was finally happening. People were beginning to see the truth. The community meetings kept growing. Each week more chairs had to be added, more voices joined in. Some spoke softly, others angrily, but all spoke honestly. The woman guided every meeting with calm and patience. She always reminded everyone that anger without direction changes nothing. "We're not here to fight," she would say. "We're here to be heard." One evening, the girl attended a meeting where a group of students spoke about their own experiences. One young man shared how he had been stopped 3 times in the same month for no clear reason. Another said he avoided certain roads because he didn't want trouble. Listening to them, the girl felt something shift inside her again. For so long she had felt alone, like her story didn't belong anywhere. But now she realized it was part of a larger struggle, one that had existed long before her and would continue long after. After the meeting, she went up to the woman and asked, "What can I do to help?" The woman smiled softly and said, "Keep telling your story. That's how change begins, one truth at a time." From that day on, the girl became more involved. She helped organize meetings, made flyers, and wrote letters to journalists. At first she was nervous. Her hands would shake when she spoke to groups. But the more she talked, the steadier her voice became. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had been silenced. The local reporter who first covered the story, published a follow-up article, this time including voices from across the community. It described not just what had happened to one family, but what it revealed about the whole system. The article gained traction online, shared by people far beyond their small town. Messages of support began to pour in from other cities, even other states. But with attention came resistance. Some people accused the family of lying for fame. Others said they were making police look bad. The woman from the center warned them that this would happen. Truth always makes people uncomfortable, she said. But discomfort is how justice begins to move. One morning, a letter arrived at the community center. It was from a retired officer who had worked in the same department years ago. He wrote that he had seen similar things happen before and had left because he couldn't be part of it anymore. He apologized for staying silent. He didn't want his name public, but he offered to quietly share what he knew. That letter gave them the missing piece they needed, a voice from inside. The lawyers prepared a formal complaint, backed by multiple testimonies. They filed it with the state oversight board that handled misconduct cases. It was a big step. The local department could ignore them before, but now the case had gone above their heads. When the complaint became public, the town buzzed with tension. News vans appeared, reporters asked questions, and cameras showed up outside the police station. The officer at the center of it all refused to comment. He walked through town with his usual cold expression, but something about his posture had changed. The confidence was still there, but the air of untouchable authority had started to fade. The department released another statement, this time promising full cooperation with the investigation. But people weren't so easily convinced anymore. They wanted accountability, not apologies. Inside her home, the girl felt both nervous and hopeful. The attention scared her, but she also understood how important this moment was. She remembered the day she felt powerless on that empty road, and now she was part of something powerful enough to shake the silence of a whole town. The woman guided her through every step. She taught her how to speak to the media without fear, how to hold her ground without anger. Dignity, she said one evening, is our strongest weapon. Never lose that. The day came when they had to meet with investigators from the state board. It was held in a neutral office in another town. The girl, her parents, the woman, and one of the lawyers sat in a small room with plain white walls. The investigators were polite, serious, and attentive. The girl told her story again. This time, she didn't tremble. Her voice was calm and steady. She told them everything, what was said, how it felt, and what happened afterward. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. One of the investigators thanked her and said, "You did the right thing by speaking up." When they left the building, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The woman looked at the girl and smiled. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you've already made a difference." Back in their town, things continued to shift. Some people who had once stayed quiet began speaking up too. Local businesses started supporting the community meetings, offering food and space. Churches and schools invited the woman to speak about fairness and courage. Even people who had doubted before were beginning to see what was happening. This wasn't an attack on law enforcement. It was a demand for integrity, but change didn't come without struggle. The family faced rude comments, even threats from anonymous callers. The woman received letters telling her to mind her own business. She never responded to any of them. She simply said, "If they're scared enough to threaten me, it means we're getting closer to the truth." And she was right. Weeks later, a small breakthrough came. The oversight board announced that they had found enough inconsistencies in the officer's past records to open a formal investigation into his behavior. It wasn't a final verdict, but it was the first real acknowledgement that something was wrong. When the girl heard the news, she cried, not out of sadness this time, but out of relief. It was the first time since that morning that she felt seen, truly seen. That night, the woman stopped by their house with a folder of new papers and a warm smile. "This isn't over," she said, "but we're moving forward. Slowly, yes, but forward." The girl's father thanked her. He said quietly, You've done for us what no one else would." The woman shook her head. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it because it's the right thing. And one day when someone else needs help, you'll do the same." The girl never forgot those words. They stayed with her, reminding her that justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about not giving up when truth is on your side. By the end of that winter, the small town that once hid behind silence had changed. People were more aware, more vocal, and more willing to question authority. The woman kept organizing, the girl kept writing, and the movement kept growing. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a dream. It felt like something that could actually happen. The day of the public hearing arrived quietly, but carried the weight of months of waiting, fear, and determination. The town hall, a brick building that usually hosted school meetings and local fairs, now felt different. News cameras lined the sidewalks, microphones pointed toward the doors, and the murmurs of townspeople filled the air like an approaching storm. The girl stood outside for a moment before going in. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She looked at her parents, who stood beside her, and then at the woman who had been guiding them all this time. The woman gave a calm nod. "You don't have to be brave all the time," she said softly. "Just be honest, that's enough." Inside, the room was packed. Reporters, townspeople, and a few police officers sat scattered across the rows of chairs. Some faces showed support, others curiosity, and a few carried quiet hostility. The officer who had caused so much pain sat at the front of the room next to his lawyer. His expression was unreadable, a mix of pride and discomfort. When the hearing began, one of the investigators from the oversight board introduced the session. He explained that the purpose was to review the findings, hear testimonies, and determine whether disciplinary action should be taken. His voice was steady, but everyone in the room could feel the tension hanging in the air. The first few speakers were officials from the department, giving procedural answers and defending their internal processes. Their words sounded polished, rehearsed, safe. They talked about protocol and procedure, avoiding the human side of the story altogether. Then came the turn for public testimonies. The woman from the community center was called first. She walked up calmly, carrying a small folder. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, not angry, but full of conviction. She began by thanking the board for finally listening, but she didn't waste time on politeness. She told them about the people she had met, the stories she had heard, and the fear that had silenced this town for too long. She didn't use fancy words or dramatic gestures. She spoke from the heart, and that made every sentence powerful. "What happened to this young girl is not just about one moment," she said. "It's about a system that forgot it was supposed to serve the people, not intimidate them. It's about how fear became normal, and how it shouldn't be." Every word landed heavily in the room. Even those who didn't want to agree couldn't look away. When she finished, she turned slightly toward the girl, giving a small nod before stepping down. It was a quiet signal. It was her turn now. The girl stood, her hands slightly shaking. Her mother reached over and squeezed her fingers before letting go. The room grew silent as she walked to the microphone. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. At first, her voice was soft, almost fragile, but as she continued, it grew stronger. She told them what happened that morning, how a simple stop turned into something that made her question her safety, her dignity, and her trust in those meant to protect her. She didn't use angry words, she didn't accuse anyone directly. She just told the truth step by step, letting her honesty speak louder than anything else could. When she described how she felt, powerless, confused, scared, the room was completely silent. Even the reporters stopped taking notes for a moment. Her story wasn't loud or emotional. It was steady, quiet, and real. When she finished, she looked at the panel and said, "All I wanted that day was to be treated with respect. That's all anyone wants." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, and then she stepped back. Her father's eyes filled with tears, and her mother reached for her hand again. For a long moment, No one spoke. Even the officer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual confidence cracking just a little. Then one of the board members thanked her, saying her courage was an example of what accountability should look like. The girl nodded, unable to speak. After that, several community members were invited to share. A teacher spoke about how she had seen the way students feared certain officers. A store owner described being pulled over late at night for no reason and never daring to complain. Each story added weight to the truth that was now too big to ignore. The woman watched from her seat, proud but calm. She had seen moments like this before. Moments when fear turned into strength and silence turned into truth. She knew change didn't come in a single day, but she also knew this was the kind of day that would be remembered. When the public testimonies ended, the hearing took a short break. People gathered in small circles, whispering, some wiping tears. The girl stepped outside for air. The cold wind brushed against her face, and for the first time in a long time, she felt lighter. The woman joined her outside, standing quietly beside her. After a few moments, she said, "You did something today that many grown people can't. You told the truth when it was hardest to do so." The girl looked at her, eyes still wet, and said, "Do you think they'll actually do something about it?" The woman smiled softly. "Justice moves slowly," she said. "But once it starts, it doesn't stop. You've already set it in motion." They went back inside. The second half of the hearing began with questions from the board to the police department. For the first time, the officers didn't sound so confident. They stumbled through explanations about missing body cam footage and incomplete reports. The audience murmured, frustration growing louder with each vague answer. When the lead investigator pressed them for accountability, one of the officers shifted the blame to technical errors. It was clear that their system had been protecting itself more than the people it served. By the time the hearing ended, the room felt different. The truth had filled every corner, and no one could pretend not to see it anymore. The officials announced that a decision would be made after further review. But everyone knew this wasn't something that could be quietly buried again. As people began to leave, many approached the girl and her family to thank them. Some were strangers, some were old neighbors, and a few were even officers from other towns. One young officer quietly said, "We need more people like you to speak up. That's how we fix what's broken." The girl didn't know what to say. She just nodded, realizing how much had changed. Months ago, she had felt completely powerless. Now her voice had become something others looked to for courage. That night, back at home, the house was quiet. The girl sat by her window, looking at the lights from the street outside. Everything felt still, but inside her there was a storm of emotions: relief, fear, pride, exhaustion. Her phone buzzed with messages, friends, classmates, even people she didn't know sending kind words. One message stood out. It was from an older woman who wrote, "You don't know me, but your story gave me strength. Thank you for not staying silent." She read it twice, feeling tears fill her eyes again. For the first time, the pain she had carried felt like it was being turned into something meaningful. Meanwhile, the woman sat at her desk in the community center, sorting through papers from the hearing. She was tired, her eyes heavy, but she couldn't stop smiling. She knew there was still a long way to go, but she also knew something had shifted, not just in the investigation, but in the heart of the town. The next morning, headlines began appearing online. Small town faces, truth after brave teen testimony. Community calls for reform in local police department. The woman received calls from nearby cities asking her to speak at their events. She turned most of them down. Her focus was still here with this girl, this town, this fight. For the girl's family, life didn't suddenly become easier. They still faced criticism from a few voices in the community. But now those voices didn't matter as much. Because when they walked through town, more people smiled. More people nodded in quiet respect. And the girl, she began to feel strong again. She started driving, slowly at first, taking back the road that once scared her. Each time she passed the place where everything had started, she didn't look away anymore. She just drove on, steady and calm, knowing she had turned pain into purpose. What happened that day at the hearing didn't solve everything, but it changed everything. The story was no longer about one girl and one officer. It was about a town learning what justice really meant. And for the first time, that town, once silent and divided, began to see itself clearly. The final decision came 3 weeks after the hearing. By then, the story had spread far beyond their small town. News outlets from other cities picked it up, and people across the country had begun to talk about it. Some debated it online, some argued, and others quietly shared it with words of support and hope. But for the girl and her family, those 3 weeks felt like years. Every day seemed to stretch longer than the one before. The waiting wasn't just about the result. It was about what it meant for their lives, their safety, and their peace. The woman from the community center stayed close to them through it all. She would stop by often, bringing coffee for the parents and sitting with the girl at the kitchen table. Sometimes they talked, other times they just sat in silence, the quiet hum of the fridge filling the space between them. One evening, the girl finally asked, "What if nothing changes? What if they just pretend to fix things?" The woman smiled softly. "Then we'll keep going," she said. "Change doesn't come all at once. It starts small, like a spark. And you, my dear, you've already lit one." The girl didn't answer right away, but her eyes softened a little. She was starting to understand that justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about truth not being buried anymore. When the day finally came, the whole town seemed to pause. The Police Oversight Board had released its report early that morning. News vans lined the streets again, but this time the air felt different. People weren't whispering as much. They were waiting. At the community center, the woman gathered with the family to read the official statement. The room was quiet as the document was opened, and the words were read aloud. It said the officer's behavior was found unacceptable and a violation of departmental ethics. He was being removed from his position and would face further review from state authorities. The report also recommended mandatory bias and conduct training across the department and the creation of a civilian review panel for future complaints. No one clapped. No one cheered. For a few seconds, they just sat there taking it in. Then the girl's mother let out a slow, shaky breath, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her father wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. The girl looked at the woman across the table and whispered, "It's over?" The woman shook her head gently. "Not over," she said, "but better." Later that day, a crowd began to gather outside the town hall again. But this time there were no protests, no shouting. People came to stand together. Families, teachers, students, and even some officers who believed in doing what was right. The girl didn't plan to speak, but the woman encouraged her gently. "They need to see the person who gave this town its voice back," she said. So she went. When she stood in front of the crowd, her voice trembled at first, but soon steadied. She thanked everyone who had supported her, but she also said something that surprised everyone there. "I don't hate him," she said quietly. "I don't want to. What he did was wrong, but if I spend my life hating him, then he still has power over me. I just want things to change so no one else has to feel what I felt." The crowd went silent for a moment. Then slowly people began to clap, not because of anger, but because of respect. The woman stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with pride. She had seen strength before, in marches, in courtrooms, in late-night meetings where tired voices refused to give up. But this moment was different. This was the kind of quiet strength that could move mountains without shouting. In the weeks that followed, the town began to change in small ways. The police department started new training sessions led by outside experts. Community meetings were held every month where people could speak openly without fear. The woman was asked to be part of the civilian review panel, and she accepted, but only on one condition: that the panel would include young voices too. When the girl heard that, she smiled nervously. "Are you trying to tell me something?" The woman grinned. "I'm not telling you anything. I'm just saying we need people who know what courage really looks like." At first, the girl wasn't sure she was ready, but slowly she began attending the meetings, sitting quietly in the back. She listened more than she spoke, learning how people discussed problems, how solutions were formed, and how easily old habits tried to return. One evening, during a heated discussion about community trust, she raised her hand. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the room. "You can't rebuild trust with words," she said. "You do it with actions. People remember how you make them feel. That's what changes things." Everyone turned toward her. The room went quiet for a moment. Then several heads nodded in agreement. After the meeting, the woman put her hand on her shoulder and said, "See? You're already doing it." The girl smiled, a little embarrassed, but deep down proud.